Nat's True Crime Podcast, and I'm going to talk about Ricardo Leyva Munoz Ramirez on February 29th, 1960, in El Paso, Texas. Richard Ramirez, aka the Night Stalker, was a serial killer who committed a string of home invasions, rapes, and murders from 1984 to 1985. He was sentenced to death and showed no remorse for his crimes. Richard Ramirez died from cancer in June 2013 while he was sat on death row and awaited his execution in the gas chamber. Richard Ramirez victims, Los Angeles. The Richard Ramirez murders began in 1984. The rape and murder of Millie Young was the first murder committed by Ramirez on April 10th, 1984. However, this murder was only solved in 2009 when his DNA matched that found at the scene. There is DNA evidence to suggest he may not have committed this alone. No charges have been brought against the second suspect. Jenny Vinkow was stabbed multiple times while she slept in her bed on June 28th, 1984. Ramirez gained access by removing a mesh screen covering an open window. He left a partial fingerprint at the scene. On March 17th, 1985, Ramirez shot Maria Hernandez in the face and dragged her into her garage. She survived the gunshot. Her roommate, Dale Okazaki, was in the kitchen and hid behind a counter. As she looked over the counter, Ramirez shot her dead. An hour later, Leon, aka Veronica Yu, was dragged from her car and shot twice. She was found by a policeman but died before reaching the hospital. Ramirez entered the home of Max and Vincent Cesara on March 27th, 1985. Upon finding Vincent asleep on the sofa, he put a gun to his head and shot him dead. This woke up Maxine and Ramirez, bound her hands, and demanded to know where they kept valuables. She managed to get free and grabbed a unloaded shotgun. Furious by this, he shot her dead and took a knife from the kitchen, which he used to mutilate her. On May 14th, 1985, he broke in the house of William Bill and Lillian Doy. He shot Bill in the face as he attempted to reach his own gun and beat him. He handcuffed Lillian and assaulted her after he had took their valuables. Bill died in the hospital and he allowed Lillian to live. Less than a month later, he broke into the house where Mabel Bell lived with her sister, Florence Lang. He bludgeoned and sexually assaulted Florence before drawing a pentagram on her thigh with lipstick. He bludgeoned and electrocuted Mabel with a electric cord. Then were both found alive 2 days later, but Mabel later died of her injuries. Carol Kyle survived an attack from Ramirez after he broke in to steal valuables. He tied her up with her son, later letting her free to show him where their valuables were. He sexually assaulted her and allowed her to redress before he handcuffed them both together. In July 1985, Ramirez bludgeoned and stabbed Mary Cannon, and a few days later he bludgeoned Whitney Bennett and strangled her with a cord that emitted sparks. Fearing a religious intervention, he ran off, and Whitney survived. She needed 478 stitches in her head wounds. Within days, he had killed Joyce Nelson by beating and kicking her to death. Later, the same day, he handcuffed Sophie Dickman and robbed her. Ramirez used the money for fencing stolen items to purchase a machete. He broke into the home of Maxon and Leela, wielding his machete. After realizing it was blunt, he shot them both in the head. Within hours, he had broke into the property of the Covenant family. He shot Shana Wrong Covenant in the head while he slept. He sexually assaulted Sunket Covenant and forced her to show him where their valuables were hidden. During August 1985, Ramirez shot Chris and Virginia Peterson, and both survived. A few days later, he entered the home of Sakina and Elias Aboleth. He shot Elias dead while he slept. He handcuffed and sexually assaulted Sakina and made her reveal the location of her jewelry. San Francisco. The Night Stalker was discovered to have moved to the San Francisco area following the shooting of Peter and Barbara Pan. He shot Peter in the head as close range while he slept, and beat and sexually assaulted Barbara. He shot her in the head and left her to die. After a press conference revealed his location, he returned to Los Angeles. Los Angeles, Orange County. Ramirez attempted to enter the Romero property, but he was scared off after their son heard him outside in the garden. He later broke into the home of Bill Carnes and Inez Erickson. He shot Bill 3 times and beat and bound Inez. After this, he sexually assaulted Inez and took their valuables. Both victims survived the attack. The stolen car was found nearby and police were able to recover a fingerprint. The fingerprint belonged to Richard Ramirez. After the Night Stalker was identified as Richard Ramirez, his mugshot was heavily circulated by police. Richard Ramirez arrest. Ramirez was arrested by police following a citizen's arrest. He was unaware that his image had been circulated in the media and was recognized by a woman due to photos of Richard Ramirez in the press. She was outside a convenience store and started shouting that he was the killer. Due to the focus on Richard Ramirez's teeth in his photo sketch and in police description, he was easily recognized by the public. Upon noticing that he'd been recognized and he was being chased by the public, he went on the run and attempted to carjack a number of passing cars. Richard Ramirez capture came at the hands of a group of residents chasing him down the road and subdued him until the police arrested. He was hit around the head with a metal pipe, and Richard Ramirez was beaten by the mob before the police arrested. Richard Ramirez childhood. Richard Ramirez had a number of accidents as a kid involving head injury, and also a result was diagnosed with epilepsy at 11. Police were able to catch Ramirez due to a fingerprint in a stolen car. His fingerprints were on file due to crimes he had committed in his younger years. To avoid his abusive father, he would spend a lot of time with his older cousin Mike and would sleep in a graveyard. They would smoke weed, and Mike would tell him brutal stories and show him gruesome pictures of torturing women during the Vietnam War. Richard Ramirez's cousin Mike shot his wife Jessie in the face during an argument, and Ramirez was a witness. Mike was found to be insane and released after 4 years in a mental hospital. This led to Ramirez starting to take LSD, breaking into people's homes, and becoming a Satanist. He was convicted of a number of petty crimes before moving on to committing a number of drug, burglary, and card theft offenses. Night Stalker Richard Ramirez, the horrifying true crime story of the infamous serial killer, covers his early years in more detail. Ramirez worked in a hotel briefly, but was fired when he attempted the rape a guest at the hotel. Her husband returned to their room and beat him before he was arrested for attempting rape. The charges were later dropped. Richard Ramirez trial. Richard Ramirez in court put on a show for the public, smiling and waving to cameras and appearing in court with sunglasses as if he was a celebrity. During his trial, Ramirez raised his hand to reveal a pentagram drawn on shouted, "Hail Satan." Much to everyone's surprise, Ramirez would smile often during his trial, and there was noticeable difference in his teeth. A week after his arrest, he saw a prison dentist, and over a 9-month period, his teeth were worked on by Dr. Alfred Otero, who repaired 9 of his teeth. Ramirez made numerous threats to shoot prosecutors and juries. Juries were left terrified when, in a unrelated internet juror, Phyllis Singletarian was shot and killed by her boyfriend, James Melton. A plot to kill the prosecutor was foiled by jail workers who overheard Ramirez planning to take a gun to the courtroom. On September 20th, 1989, Ramirez was convicted of 13 counts of murder, 5 attempts murder, 11 sexual assaults, and 14 burglaries. He was sentenced to die in the gas chamber in November 1989. After sentence, he said, "Big deal. Death always went with the territory." Richard Ramirez's wife was Doreen Loy, who married Richard Ramirez after a romantic that started with prison letters. This led to a visit to see him and propose in 1988, and they married at St. Quentin Prison in 1996. She was initially vocal in her defense of Ramirez, but they later separated and she disappeared from the limelight. Ramirez, over the course of his sentence, Philip Kahlo's book, The Night Stalker, The Disturbing Life and Chilling Crimes of Richard Ramirez, features both interviews with Ramirez and a number of his female admirers. It is believed that he received 1,000 of letters and hundreds of photographs from fans. One writer wrote about their letters in Letters from the Night Stalker. A decade of correspondence with Richard Ramirez, many showing his pen pals in sexual suggestive poses, often at the response of Ramirez via his letters. Richard Ramirez started drawing in prison, sending sketches of his pen pals and a number of his signature signed artworks have been sold to private collectors. Richard Ramirez appeals. The Night Stalker first round of appeals were unsuccessful in August 2006. His appeal was delayed as they were 50,000 pages of records from the court to review. His request for a rehearing was declined in September 2006. He had a number of other appeals pending at the time of his death. Richard Ramirez's death. Richard Ramirez died as a result of cancer, and Richard Ramirez's date of death was June 7th, 2013. He had hepatitis C at the time of his death and was generally in poor health due to his previous substance abuse. Richard Ramirez's death was communicated to his next of kin, who did not claim his body, so he was cremated by the state. Media. In 2021, Netflix released a documentary documenting his crimes called Night Stalker: The Hunt for a Serial Killer. It was also confirmed in crime scene the vanishing at the Cecil Hotel that Richard Ramirez had stayed at the famous Cecil Hotel and was seen returning to the hotel covered in blood. True crime books or documentaries are available to purchase for future reading. I will earn a small commission if you make a purchase using this ad link. As an Amazon associate, I earn from qualifying purchases. Elizabeth Short, Black, Alia, Roy Whiting, and Sarah Payton. Thanks for watching my podcast. Please like, subscribe, and comment.